The events began in a place that looked like an old corridor with closed doors, where silence prevailed, interrupted by a loud sound that seemed like an explosion or a collision. A strong warrior appeared wearing armor, receiving a powerful blow that violently knocked him to the ground. Directly behind him, a young man wearing glasses was running, trying to avoid a fierce attack. Nearly struck him from the huge warrior chasing him. The young man stopped tense and afraid, wondering how he ended up in such a strange and terrifying place. In moments he was shocked by the sudden and extremely violent appearance of a frightening creature resembling a dragon, which attacked him ferociously. His memories began flashing rapidly before his eyes, recalling dangerous moments in his life when he was attacked by monstrous beings like a dragon and a massive sea creature. He also remembered an exciting moment when he found himself riding a dragon during one of his strange adventures. But the adventure was not always in his favor, as he later faced another giant warrior who defeated him with a single blow, knocking him forcefully to the ground. The massive beast approached him in extreme rage, staring at him with the intent to harm. The young man kept looking into the monster's face, thinking about his past life that was ordinary and aimless, wondering how he went from being a 30-year-old unemployed man to this terrifying situation. He kept questioning in astonishment the fate that led him to this frightening confrontation, when suddenly, he was rescued before the monster could attack him. At that moment, a man and a woman appeared behind him, calling out to him with extreme concern, trying to bring him back to consciousness. The man called him Your Highness, while the woman asked him about his seed. Despite that, the young man Gilzian continued to wonder internally about what was happening to him, wanting to understand his condition better after that. An image appeared showing a card featuring a powerful and unique type of mage called the Former Supreme Mage, as if hinting at a special fate awaiting Gilzone. After seeing the card, Gilzian decided that this destiny he found himself in had to be faced and there was no escaping it. The events then shifted to depict the previous life of this young man. When he used to sit in front of his computer in a messy room surrounded by empty soda bottles, the young man looked at the computer screen in bewilderment, wondering who this strange person who suddenly appeared on the screen was. He was surprised by the comments of that person describing their suffering in life. Wondering when people started writing such things sarcastically, the young man imagined that what he was reading, the screen might be real, and he liked the idea, expressing it in a dreamy manner. He then relaxed in his chair, thinking about a second life he might have a chance to live. He saw his life summarized in just a few lines. He was raised in an orphanage without parents like the other children there, then worked in a factory. After leaving the orphanage when he reached the age of 30, he worked in part-time jobs. While preparing for the civil service exam, his routine life was dull and simple, and he felt as if it had already ended. His only joy in life was this game he spent a long time playing and mastered to the point that he was nicknamed the Expert Warrior, and he believed that no one understood the game more than he did. He lived in a small apartment with very few belongings, and his life revolved within the limits of that cramped room. The young man began to wonder, sadly, whether his life would have changed if there had been a guide to lead him through it. Then he read an advertisement calling for someone to participate in a second life journey, which made him feel both excited and amused at the same time, and he decided to respond to the ad. Out of curiosity and for fun, he began typing a response on his keyboard, and despite the warning, but it wouldn't be easy, he insisted on continuing after the young man began to feel uneasy about the mysterious person typing on the screen. He found himself wondering whether he should just ignore it, as it was starting to seem strangely serious. After moments of hesitation and thought, the young man pressed the enter key, deciding to engage in this strange dialogue, justifying it by thinking that, whatever this experience was, it was better than his current reality. But the response he received was disappointing to him, as it seemed void of fun and emotion, and he wondered with disdain if all this buildup was just for a simple message like that. The young man was greatly surprised when a direct reply came from the other party, repeating what seemed to be the word nonsense, which clearly shocked and unsettled him. His anxiety escalated sharply when the mysterious person on the screen told him that he wanted to see if he could survive this time. The young man was hit with a huge shock. His face changed with terror, and he could no longer make sense of what was happening around him. Suddenly, he felt his body fading away, and a scream escaped his mouth as he vanished mysteriously. And frighteningly, from his place after his disappearance, his room appeared quiet and empty, with only a headset hanging on the table. Elsewhere, in a dark and mysterious place, the young man began to grumble and question why he always found himself in such situations while being restrained. And he started wondering about the motives of those who kidnapped him, questioning if it had something to do with his. One of the kidnappers approached him, trying to grab him forcefully, while the young man screamed in desperate attempts to make his voice heard. A group of masked men gathered around him and coldly informed him that he was the third prince of the magical Balt Empire. One of them looked at him with a stern expression, confirming that royal identity, which deepened the young man's confusion and anxiety. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, as he knew nothing about the identity of Galician Elio de Vault, the name they called him. One of the men ordered the removal of the gag from his mouth so that he could speak to them. After that, another man instructed him to raise his head and opened his eyes wide to look at him, insisting that he listened carefully. When the young man opened his eyes, he found himself face to face with one of his captors, who was closely observing his facial features, confirming that his face matched the required specifications with great accuracy. The young man was shocked when he remembered that this moment perfectly resembled the assassination scene of the third prince in the game Shine Boss, which he used to play all the time. The young man began to feel like he was dreaming. He wasn't sure what was happening around him. Questioning why, the masked men insisted on treating him as the third prince and slowly realized that what was happening was very serious and dangerous. The kidnappers told him that he would be executed today in the name of the Republic and that his head would be sent to his father. He tried to object and explain the misunderstanding, but they wouldn't listen and threatened him harshly with a sword. His fear intensified when he felt the blade touched his neck, drawing a bit of blood. At that moment, the kidnappers discussed among themselves that killing a prince, no matter how awful, would definitely provoke the emperor to seek revenge. The young man began to grasp the horrifying truth. This was not a prank or a joke. It was real, and he was indeed the Prince Gillosan, known for his bad behavior and laziness, who had been removed from the line of succession due to his terrible reputation. Then he realized in utter panic that this character was just a non-playable character NPC who dies early in the story. He wondered anxiously and in great fear if he was the NPC then who was sitting in the player's seat and controlling the events. As he was consumed by these terrifying thoughts, one of the kidnappers coldly asked him if he had any last words. One of the kidnappers repeated the question, asking if he had any last words he wished to say. Gil Lucien felt overwhelmed with confusion and declared in a trembling voice that he had no idea what was happening around him and that he was not the third prince as they believed. However, the kidnappers mocked his words, insisting that his red eyes and well-built body were more than enough proof that he was the third prince, and warned him not to try and deceive them as there was no escape. Gil Lucien trembled in fear and tension, his heart pounding rapidly, unable to believe the strange situation he found himself in. He was no longer the hero, but a side character, one threatened with death at any moment. His anger and anxiety grew, and he described what was happening as absurd and meaningless. The man raised his sword, preparing to carry out the execution, assuring him that there was no personal grudge and that he would make sure he died quickly and without pain, bidding him farewell coldly with the words, "Goodbye, third prince." In that critical moment, the young man screamed internally that he couldn't die like this, that there was something he had to accomplish first. He looked desperately at his attacker, wondering what it was he was supposed to achieve, and suddenly asked himself in confusion, why didn't he feel any pain despite the sword being so close? In the next moment, time froze in a strange way, and a mysterious notification appeared before his eyes. Reading the game has begun. He received another message, confirming that a player would now take control of the character Jealousy and Elo de Balt, which filled him with overwhelming joy. He was still alive. Gil Lucien realized that if he was indeed being controlled by a player, he might be able to survive. He was now inside the very game. He loved and had spent years playing, becoming a sort of living guide within it. More notifications appeared in front of him, informing him of initial rewards. The player had received 3 points to enhance personal attributes and 2 points for skills. He received a new quest called Escape the Crisis and understood that these points would help him improve his abilities and invent new techniques. To stay alive. Everything around him paused as if someone had pressed the pause button, and it became clear to him that the main objective was to survive this current situation. He needed to act, to move the scenario forward. Just like in the game, he had only a few moments to choose the right course of action, and he had to decide quickly before time resumed, and he was once again faced with certain death. At that moment, a fateful choice appeared before him. His survival or death depended on it. Destiny cards were displayed in front of him, offering extra points, unique skills, exclusive gear, and personal storylines, and he was allowed to choose only one card at random. From a total of 1024 cards, he had only a few seconds to pick the right card, and the outcome relied entirely on luck. Gil Lucien made a firm decision to begin this game of chance and skill, convinced that his entire future hinged on this one choice. Lights and game effects overlapped in a dazzling display, making the moment of decision even more thrilling and tense. He fully understood that as soon as he chose a card, time would return to normal, and he might be executed instantly if his choice was the wrong one. He felt a deep fear as he prepared to make his decision, realizing that his life now depended entirely on either luck or the right pick. Gil Lucien gathered his courage and took a deep breath, then decided the time had come to make a choice. In the face of his hesitation, he told himself he had no other option but to flip one of the cards. Despite his intense anxiety and the restraints around his hands, Curiosity took over, and he couldn't resist the urge to discover his fate through the card he would choose. With a trembling smile, he wondered whether the card would lead him to glory, misery, or perhaps straight to the edge of doom. Suddenly, he remembered a special rule known only to expert players in this abandoned world. A rule that guaranteed he would receive at least one close combat card to help ease the beginning of the game. He also recalled that the average rank of the 3 starting cards was supposed to be B, so he decided to try selecting a good card, perhaps a solid defensive one, not something overpowered. He made his decision and quickly pressed his finger on one of the cards. He was utterly shocked when a fake card of rank F appeared, titled Slave Gladiator, which left him deeply disappointed. Not giving up easily, he selected another card, hoping for something better, only to be surprised again by another low-ranking D card called Third-Rate Actor, which only deepened his frustration. He stared in disbelief at the 2 cards he had chosen and felt a deep despair, because this meant the last card would have to be exceptionally high-ranked to bring the average up to B, which was nearly impossible. Yet with extreme caution and faint hope, he reached for the final card, forcing a weak smile as he wondered whether this card might be the legendary S rank that could change the rules of the game entirely. When he chose the final card, bright lights flared and stunning colors exploded around him, causing him to stare in awe and disbelief. Amid his amazement, he discovered that he had indeed drawn a legendary transcendent rank card. It was of the type Supreme Mage, something he never expected in a million years. Gil Lucian couldn't comprehend what was happening, and felt as though he had entered a state of madness or a strange dream. Obtaining such a powerful legendary card at the very beginning of the game was something nearly impossible. He recalled his knowledge of this card and remembered that the Supreme Mage card was the best of all. It held immense offensive power that allowed its wielder to dominate combat from afar. He began to wonder seriously, how could such a powerful card appear from the start? Then a shocking possibility dawned on him. Being a non-playable character NPC and not a player character might be the reason he received this legendary card from the beginning. In a sudden moment of clarity, Gil Lucian realized that his body now was that of the character Jealousy and Balt, the infamous Third Prince, who was not just any ordinary character, but had a noble lineage and a well-established identity. He recalled that the imperial family Prince Jealousy and belonged to was renowned in ancient tales for the overwhelming magical power of its members. Gil Lucian began to gather his thoughts as he looked at the cards in front of him, clearly realizing that he had to make his decision now to save himself from certain death. The only good card visible to him might offer a chance at survival, but he quickly realized the bad news. The legendary Supreme Mage card might not be the most suitable solution. Despite its unique traits and overwhelming potential, he had doubts about how useful it would be in this specific moment. He quickly reasoned to himself that each card had its own set of perks, such as bonus stats, unique skills, gear, and character stories. But right now, he desperately needed only the 3 unique skills the card offered, most notably a defensive skill called Superior Spatial Control, which worked exclusively against magical attacks and weapons imbued with magic. The young man also recalled a crucial point using magic. Any situation required drawing mana energy from the mana circuit surrounding the heart. He hesitated, briefly staring at the legendary card and wondering how he could possibly pass it up. In the end, he realized that his experience as a veteran player stopped him from choosing such a luxurious card, because if he chose it, he could very well be killed instantly, and he knew this wasn't just a game, where you could come back after dying. It was real life. Despite his anxiety, he couldn't help but see the irony in the bizarre situation being presented with a transcendent-level card while on the verge of execution. So he decided to give it up and choose a lower-tier card instead. He chose the Slave Gladiator card with an F rank, which was considered the worst possible option. And he mocked himself bitterly as he made that decision. He cast a sad glance at the legendary card, silently promising himself that he'd return to it someday, quietly asking it to wait for him. The Slave Gladiator card activated automatically, granting him 3 unique skills that would activate in just 5 seconds, causing him to feel anger and confusion and to wonder if someone was playing tricks on him. Despite the frustration, he accepted that this was his shot and he would do everything he could to survive. He reorganized his thoughts with clarity. This character in the original story was supposed to die a painful death at this exact moment, but now he was in control of the body and he was fully convinced that he would survive this time. As the game resumed, suddenly he realized he had to use his new skills quickly, but was shocked to find he wasn't entirely sure how to activate them. He screamed in confusion as his opponent attacked him again. He took a heavy blow that sent him bending in pain to the ground, and his attacker believed he had finished him off completely. The attackers regrouped and decided to withdraw after completing the mission, but they were stunned to discover that the third prince was not dead. Despite the deep gash in his neck, something they had thought impossible, Gil Lucian was surprised to find himself still alive and felt intense pain in his neck, but he was grateful for the instinctive activation of the skill that had kept him alive despite the severe wound. A status screen appeared, informing him that he had used one of the skills and wouldn't be able to use it again. 24 hours. The 3 skills he had obtained from the Slave Gladiator card were comically named Taste of Masochism, which reduced physical pain and boosted both physical and psychological recovery. Taste of Sadism, which temporarily increased movement speed, and Taste of Servitude, which allowed him to survive a single fatal blow without dying. Though his abilities seemed useful in theory, he was well aware that their F rank reflected just how weak and ineffective they actually were in real combat. The attackers were visibly shocked to see his head still attached to his body, and the young man decided he needed to act first before they could understand what was happening and launch another attack, especially after their leader had confirmed that his survival should have been impossible. Gil Lucian shouted angrily as he looked at the leader of the group that had tried to kill him, calling him by name, Pamela Daymark, and accusing him of treachery and disgrace. Everyone was stunned by the sharpness of his tone, and the fact that he knew their leader's real name, and their expression showed confusion and concern. The group leader asked, surprised and bewildered, how the young man knew his real name. But Gil Lucian didn't give him a chance to respond and stepped forward defiantly. He shouted even louder, expressing his intense anger and boldly challenging him, demanding how he dared not recognize the one who now inhabited this body, and confidently claimed that he was his true master. To everyone's astonishment, the young man suddenly declared that he was a Olam, the Lord of Vengeance. The group members silently questioned the meaning of his words, as they were priests of Elam, servants of the Lord of Vengeance. But they were also hired assassins, and the church they belonged to was part of the Revolutionary Army, one of the 3 major forces seeking to overthrow the Empire, which is why they had kidnapped the 3rd prince as part of their plan. In a clever attempt to survive, the young man decided to act even more boldly and forcefully, claiming that Aulam had incarnated into his body and that he was far more than a failed actor. He shouted at the top of his voice that the Lord himself had descended into the prince's body. Then he screamed at them furiously, commanding them to release him immediately, threatening them if they continued to ignore him. The leader responded skeptically, asking if he truly was the vessel for Elam, but Gil Lucian immediately lashed out, screaming in his face that he was insolent to even suggest such a thing about the body he now inhabited. He then stepped closer and pressed his hand against the man's face, causing him pain, and surprising him with such unexpected boldness. In that moment, the young man felt he may have taken the act too far, but the other priests began to hesitate, convincing themselves that this arrogant behavior truly did match the personality of Alom, the Lord of Vengeance. The young man recalled that in this world there were 12 lords abandoned by fate, and most of them loved interfering in human affairs, including Olam, the Lord of Vengeance, known for involving himself in every war and conflict. At that point, the group leader decided to speak gently, trying to appease Lord Alam, requesting that he grant them some portion of his divine blessing. But Gil Lucian responded again with great fury, accusing them of being unworthy of any blessing. He harshly reminded them that they had once offered him a fake idol made to look like pure gold, sarcastically asking if they thought he wouldn't notice the difference. The leader replied with visible anxiety, trying to justify himself, but Gil Lucian shouted again in rage and defiance, declaring that presenting a mere gold-plated statue instead of pure gold was a grave insult to a lord like him. Overwhelmed by his fury and shouting, they finally submitted and decided to release him immediately, apologizing profusely in deep confusion. Gil Lucian felt relieved and pleased that most of them had fallen for his bluff, realizing that the 3rd prince, Jealousy and Balt, had always been known for his weakness and failure, and no one would have expected him to deceive them this way. Still, he noticed that their leader, Pamela Daymark, remained suspicious of him. The leader stepped forward, apologizing deeply and begging Lord Alam for forgiveness. Though inwardly he decided to wait and watch carefully while the young man assumed that was what the leader was thinking in an effort to further assert his dominance. The young man sternly ordered them to kneel before him, and they complied instantly, pleading for mercy and forgiveness. In total submission, the group members began pleading for forgiveness, kneeling before Gil Lucian after most of them had fully believed his act of being Lord Elam. But Pamelo, the group's leader, approached him calmly, showing great respect and expressing both regret and honor at being in the Lord's presence, yet slightly questioned why the Lord had descended himself instead of sending a divine message directly to the high priest inside. Gil Lucian immediately realized that this man Pamelo was extremely sharp and still doubted him, and he knew he needed something more convincing to guarantee his safety. He then stepped toward Pamela, the firm resolve, and clearly stated that he had chosen Prince Jealousy and Balt to be his personal messenger, and ordered that no one was to lay a hand on him. Pamela's face showed clear displeasure upon hearing this, as he instantly realized he might be losing a valuable figure he had planned to exploit for his own gain. Gil Lucian continued confidently, saying that the Third Prince of the Empire Gilosi and Balt would eventually join the Revolutionary Army, and that they should understand this well. Pamela replied with apparent submission, stating his agreement and assuring that they would honor Lord Alana's will and return the prince alive. Still, deep down he knew that if they returned now, the deception would be exposed. After speaking with the priest putting him in serious danger, Lucian could see the suspicion in Pamela's sharp eyes, suggesting that he believed someone from within might be orchestrating these events. Despite these concerns, Lucian continued playing his role with full confidence and told Pamela that the third prince would not be returning to the imperial palace, but would instead head to the city of Oryx. Pamela was visibly surprised by this and asked what exactly the young man meant by it. But the young man pressed on, boldly declaring that on their way to Arax they would be responsible for protecting this young prince, and even ordered them to treat him with great respect. Thoughts began to align in Lucian's mind. Arax was the largest city in the west, and the capital of the Revolutionary Army. It was in truth hostile territory to imperial citizens. But to him, someone familiar with the game's storyline, it was safer than it appeared. He fully understood that in a city controlled by the revolutionaries, knowledge was the real power. So even though he had temporarily given up the legendary Supreme Mage card, he was confident he would find many other ways to manipulate the system and turn the game to his advantage. Lucian then ordered the group to move quickly, firmly directing them toward the path he had chosen, and they still largely believed he was Alum. Inside, he was determined to transform the weak character he was currently playing into a legendary figure smiling to himself, as he realized that the only way to achieve that was to deceive everyone in his path to the top. As evening fell, the group sat around the campfire, its sparks quietly drifting into the dark sky. Suddenly, the group members began offering Lucian various types of food, each trying to convince him to eat what they had prepared, competing among themselves to gain his attention. In favor, Lucian felt overwhelmed by the sheer amount of food placed before him, and clearly told them that he was trying to lose weight, so he didn't want to eat all of it. But the group insisted enthusiastically on feeding him, arguing that Lord Alam had instructed them to take good care of him, and that if he refused to eat, the Lord would be angry with them. Lucian started to feel uneasy, hesitant under their innocent, gleaming gazes, which didn't resemble those of hired killers at all. They looked more like an eager group of young people. Despite their insistence, Lucian refused the food with visible difficulty, telling them that he was struggling with his desire to eat but had to endure it for his goal. One of them tried to convince him that he wouldn't gain weight from just little, but he wasn't swayed by such arguments. They kept trying to reassure him that he wasn't overweight and had a good body, but he accused them of lying, thinking to himself that refusing food in these conditions felt like real torture. At that moment, Pamela, their leader, appeared and harshly scolded them for being careless and not assigning any guards despite being on dangerous imperial territory. He ordered them to move quickly and regain their caution, and they obeyed at once. In the meantime, Pamela tried to ease the situation by telling Lucian that their actions came from deep faith in him, which Lucian accepted with understanding. Then one of them playfully offered Lucian a piece of bird meat, only to pull it back quickly, claiming he was joking and would eat it himself, which annoyed Lucian, who didn't appreciate the joke. Pamela then pointed out that the prince had lost a significant amount of weight in just 3 days. Lucian was also surprised by how much weight he had lost, so much that he wondered if the story's illustrator had suddenly changed. Pamela sat beside Lucian and sincerely told him that he had seen many people in his life, but none who had endured what Lucian had. Expressing deep admiration, Lucian smiled and told him that he understood exactly what Pamela had been thinking from the start. He had been worried about how they would escape imperial territory with the prince in such poor physical condition. Lucian clearly remembered his physical suffering during the journey, how he would collapse from exhaustion, and how his body simply couldn't endure the strain. In one of those moments, he collapsed again and couldn't even get back up, beginning to feel hopeless. Then a status window appeared before him, showing his character information, and he was shocked to discover that his stamina stat was only 9A, painfully low number compared to normal characters whose stamina typically ranged between 40 and 60, making him closer to a corpse in his current state. Lucian realized he needed to find a way to raise his stamina and quickly lose weight if he wanted to continue his journey. Meanwhile, Pamela and the others were extremely worried about his deteriorating condition, and they discussed the idea of using a healing potion to help him, but hesitated because of Lord Elam's instructions. As for Lucian, he internally rejected the idea of using a healing potion. He didn't want to be more of a burden on them than he already was. He felt a deep sadness because of his current state and an intense weakness that he was not used to. In a moment of overwhelming frustration, he struck the ground with his fist, anguished by the physical frailty that was truly tormenting him. Lucian stood up with great difficulty, despite the exhaustion evident on his face and trembling body, and looked firmly at the men of the group, declaring his refusal to use any potions and asking them to continue marching. Gil Lucian activated one of his special skills, masochistic inclination, which increased his mental and physical recovery for 30 seconds, allowing him to continue. Walking despite his fatigue inside, Gil Lucian realized that his extremely low stamina stat could be improved quickly through intense training. So he decided he would never give up, and would never be a burden to the group, preferring to endure pain repeatedly rather than be dead weight. The group members were visibly stunned as they watched Gil Lucian endure the pain and fatigue without pause, and they began to reassess their view of him as unexpectedly strong and resilient. After long effort and harsh training, Gil Lucian's stamina improved significantly to reach 37. He felt somewhat satisfied, but he knew the road ahead was still long. That evening, Gil Lucian sat down with Pamela, who told him that by tomorrow they would reach the magic gate they had previously used and from there head to the city of Oryx, but Pamela revealed a serious problem. The original mission had been to kill Gil Lucian, not to bring him back alive, as none of them had expected him to become Lord Alana's messenger. Gil Lucian continued speaking, surprising Pamela, and confirmed that there was a traitor inside the palace working with them, that they were supposed to return with the prince's corpse as proof of their success, but having failed to do so, the traitor would likely realize something went wrong and prepare to act. Pamela pointed out that their identities were well known, and their return route would be easy to predict, so the gate they planned to return through had likely already been sealed. That put them in a highly dangerous position, potentially surrounded from both sides. Pamela was astonished that Gil Lucian had figured out so quickly there was a traitor within the palace, and asked if he knew who it was. Gil Lucian replied with great confidence that the traitor was Viscount Zarek Moss, the Imperial Court Affairs Minister, and asked whether he was wrong in his assumption. Pamela was shocked by the claim and asked. That led him to that conclusion. Gil Lucian thought carefully about how to answer. It wasn't just a simple test from Pamela, but clearly an attempt to assess his abilities and confirm any suspicions. He wanted to prove himself convincingly in order to maintain control over the priests for a while. He recalled many details about the character Zarek Moss, affirming that the man originally came from the Khan tribe, which had a recent history of conflict with the Empire over control of the Northwest. Gil Lucian added that the Khan tribe was known for its closeness to the Revolutionary Army, making the cooperation between them and the minister perfectly logical. He also mentioned that the minister had recently married his daughter off to one of the nobles of the border regions, which had long been sites of skirmishes between the Empire and the revolutionaries, implying that the marriage might have been a step to strengthen ties with the Revolutionary Army. He asserted that such borderland marriages usually fell into one of two categories, either fierce enemies of the revolutionaries or allies. He leaned toward the latter. He also explained that the noble who had recently married the minister's daughter was likely a follower of Olam, or a priest under his command, making his connection to the upper church of Yahello more reasonable. Pamela was impressed by Gil Lucian's intelligence and the precision of his reasoning, expressing his amazement that the third prince, once known for weakness and incompetence, had this level of insight and analytical ability, completely changing his perception of him. But Gil Lucian understood deep down that what amazed Pamela wasn't him as a real person, but the character he was now playing, Jill Ocean, who must stay alive at all costs. Gil Lucian returned to his thoughts and recalled that the current situation was entirely different from the original game story, where the third prince was supposed to die. He realized that Minister Zarif would now use his strongest card to kill him. At that moment, he remembered the most powerful military commander the minister could use against him. Marquis Elon Lewitt, the commander of the Royal Knights Pamelo, bluntly told him they needed to move quickly if they hoped to escape the ambush and reach the gate in time. Any delay would leave them trapped from both sides, but Gil Lucian clarified that speed alone wouldn't help anymore. They needed to find an entirely new route, one he had never taken in the game before, a path unlike anything he already knew. Pamela began speaking to Gil Lucian, telling him that Lord Olam had ordered them to ensure his safety. Gil Lucian then suggested that they wait a little while in this location. Pamela asked why they should stay here specifically, and suddenly realized Gil Lucian's plan when a mysterious figure appeared, observing them closely, sarcastically saying they were probably waiting for the bear and the nightingale. The mysterious man stepped forward, wearing a cloak and a mask that hid most of his face, and provocatively asked Gil Lucian whether he was planning to wait for his personal guards. Gil Lucian felt both weary and confused by this strange man, especially when the latter began threatening him, angrily pointing a sword at him, and warning that if he didn't speak, who would force his mouth open. Gil Lucian quickly thought things through and decided that his best move was to try to understand this stranger's intentions, who seemed to have very little patience. Gil Lucian smiled boldly and asked who the stranger was, adding that if he didn't know who he was, then why should he answer his questions? This response infuriated the stranger, and it became clear to Gil Lucian that this man was far more short-tempered than he had anticipated. Gil Lucien decided to change his approach slightly and agreed to tell him two important things. First, that he had no intention of returning to the Imperial Palace, and explained that if he did, he never would have followed the Priests of Vengeance in the first place. Second, he admitted that he was indeed waiting for the bear and the nightingale, but saw no reason to share further details with a complete stranger, whom he described as a mere thug, unworthy of his trust. The mysterious man became enraged and stepped closer, threatening Gil Lucien more aggressively, clearly annoyed by his boldness and lack of respect. Suddenly, Gil Lucien noticed a pleasant and distinct floral scent around the man, which greatly surprised and puzzled him. At that moment, Pamela stepped in quickly and introduced the stranger to Gil Lucien as Urgel, clarifying that he wasn't one of the priests, but rather a mercenary and an important ally in their revolutionary efforts. Gil Lucien noted to himself that this made sense, as player characters in the game world forsaken by the lady rarely belong to fixed actions, instead operating freely like mercenaries. It also crossed his mind that Urgel might actually be a real player like him. Once he had calmed down a bit, Urgel demanded again that Gil Lucien explained why he was waiting for the bear and the nightingale in this specific place. Gil Lucien remembered clearly that the bear and the nightingale referred to a powerful knight named Kars Killian, a 6-star knight who acted as the third Princess Shadow and the skilled witch Turvan Sui, his magic mentor and a 7-star ranked sorceress. Urgel repeated his question insistently, demanding to know the exact reason for waiting for those two people here. One of the priests interrupted, objecting, and told Pamela that time was running out, suggesting they until the prince immediately and be done with it. But Urgel suddenly mentioned the name of Marquis Ellen Loinia, commander of the Royal Knights, which immediately drew everyone's attention. Gil Lucien directly asked Pamela and Urgel whether they knew of this powerful marquis, demanding a clear answer. Pamela confirmed that of course he knew him. He was one of the Empire's 3 greatest swordmasters. When asked cautiously why Gil Lucien was suddenly bringing him up, Gil Lucien ignored the question and asked another directly. Could either of them win in a fight against that powerful knight? Everyone fell silent without answering, prompting Gil Lucien to mock them harshly, saying that if they walked straight into a confrontation, they'd all be killed without a chance. And if anyone wished to die, they should go alone and not drag everyone else with them. Marquis Elon Louis was renowned for his exceptional skills, having achieved 9-star mastery with the sword. He was one of the most powerful characters on the entire continent, a terrifying warrior capable of wiping out his enemies with ease. Urgel sarcastically remarked that facing the Marquis might not be a bad option, especially if they wanted to. Vanished from existence without leaving a trace of their bodies behind. The mysterious man Urgel fully understood the meaning behind Gil Lucien's warning about facing Marquis Elon Lut, and considered that going toward him would be akin to walking into certain death. At the same time, Gil Lucien noticed that Urgel surprisingly accepted the matter without argument, avoiding any further debate, which confirmed to him that this man wasn't as thoughtless as he had initially seemed. Pamela asked what solution Gil Lucien proposed, if the gate really was blocked by Marquis Elon's knights, pointing out that the arrival of the bear and the nightingale might not be enough to break through. Gil Lucien noticed that Urgel remained silent, giving him the impression that Urgel might already know something. Gil Lucien stepped forward confidently, saying there was a way to survive and enter the city of Auroch safely, and assured them that if they followed his instructions precisely, they would reach their goal. Before explaining his plan, he asked Pamela to promise him 2 things. The first was absolute secrecy about what he was about to say, emphasizing the importance of the promise. In the name of Lord Alam, Pamela agreed to the promise, swearing by Alam that he would keep the secret no matter the cost. Gil Luciano's second request was simpler. He asked Pamela to bring him a specific item if they succeeded in entering the city safely. Pamela was surprised and asked what the item was, and Gil Lucien replied very simply, just an ordinary pair of glasses that could easily be found in the city of Oryx. Gil Lucien then began revealing an important secret, explaining that the bear known as Kars Zillion was in fact none other than Kars Luit, the knight known as the Knight of Dawn, and was actually the illegitimate son of Marquis Elon Luit. Pamela was completely shocked upon hearing this unexpected truth, and Gil Lucien assured him that only a very small number of people knew this secret, and even Kars himself was unaware of it. Gil Lucien noticed that Urgel didn't seem surprised at all, which only reinforced his suspicion that Urgel was a real player who knew the game's lore well, and had perhaps already realized he was inside a game world, especially since the third prince hadn't died, as he was supposed to in the original storyline. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted, followed by a booming voice calling for the prince. Kars Killian appeared, accompanied by the powerful sorceress Turvan Sui, both looking for Gil Lucien. Kars launched a fierce attack against Pamela's men, accusing them of kidnapping the prince and demanding they hand him over if they valued their lives. The priests were stunned. They had indeed kidnapped the prince, but now he was willingly traveling with them, Meanwhile, Gil Lucian began sprinting toward the scene of the battle. He had left hidden markers along their path to guide cars to them, and he realized how dangerous Turban's involvement could be, knowing the conflict would only end in death if not stopped. At that very moment, Turban appeared amidst a massive burst of magical fire, threatening the men and demanding to know where Gil Lucian was. When one of the priests asked her to wait, she became furious, saying she would reduce them to ash and then search for her student herself. In that critical moment, Gil Lucian came rushing in, shouting at the top of his lungs for his mentor. "Stop." Immediately, Kars and Turvan both froze in shock, staring at him in disbelief, unable to believe that the frail, exhausted figure before them was truly Prince Gil Lucian. Gil Lucian breathed heavily, but smiled with relief, and said it really is Gil Lucian. Anger flared in Kars's eyes as he screamed furiously at the priests, blaming them for the prince's miserable condition and demanding an explanation for what they had done to him. The priests looked at one another in confusion, realizing that they had done nothing that would explain this state, and that whatever had happened to the prince stemmed from causes they did not yet understand. Gil Lucian stepped forward toward Kars and Turvan, trying to explain the strange situation. He assured them that he was no longer kidnapped. But following the group by his own free will, Kars was clearly surprised and asked in confusion what the prince meant by that. Gil Lucian admitted, somewhat playfully, that he had been kidnapped, but now not anymore. Both Kars and Turvan were shocked, and Turvan erupted in anger, saying she had gone through hell to save him, so how could he say something so ridiculous now? She threatened to destroy everyone if he didn't stop his nonsense. Gil Lucian nervously wondered to himself how a mentor like her could behave so violently, starting to suspect she was more like a thug than a proper sorceress. At that moment, he remembered that Turvan was known throughout the Empire as the Red Shadow, a sorceress raised in the Tower of Five Colors, and rumors claimed she was an old witch, over 200 years old, even though in truth she was a girl no older than 19. Kars quickly stepped in and gently calmed Turvan down, reminding her that the situation wasn't as dangerous as it seemed, and asked her to give Gil Lucian a chance to explain himself first. Turvan immediately calmed down, as she was extremely weak in front of handsome men especially. Bars in a much calmer tone this time, Gil Lucian clearly declared that he had decided to head to the city of Oryx. Kars couldn't handle this decision, and shouted in outrage, accusing the prince of madness for choosing to walk into the stronghold of the Revolutionary Army, the Empire's greatest enemy. But Gil Lucian assured him calmly that he knew exactly what he was doing, and that he understood Kars didn't trust him. Still, he made it clear with deep seriousness that the path he had chosen was no longer a continuation of his careless, frivolous past. Gil Lucian explained that he had chosen this path on his own, and that it was the only one he could take now to stay alive and fulfill his destiny. So he asked Kars not to stand in his way. Emphasizing that these were his lord's orders, he then turned to Turvan and asked for forgiveness from his mentor, admitting he hadn't lived up to his responsibilities before. He honestly explained that he had never given up on magic, but simply hadn't found the right time, and he promised her that one day he would reach the light of the five colors she once taught him about Turvan. As completely astonished to see Gil Lucian speak with such confidence, he had never even dared to look her in the eyes before, and she was stunned that he clearly knew a secret phrase often whispered in the Tower of Five Colors, a phrase most mages of this era didn't even know. Turvan quietly wondered why her student, who had never seemed interested in magic before, now appeared so eager and determined to master and rise to the top. She felt deep regret for not recognizing her student's talent sooner, and began reflecting on how she had failed him over the past 5 years. Gil Lucian then clearly asked her and Kars to accompany him on his journey to RX. Turvan agreed immediately, and without hesitation. Gil Lucian was surprised by how easily she accepted, but she explained that, as a teacher, she must trust her student if he shows awareness and a true change for the better, and she playfully wondered if the prince would one day make her the head of the Tower of Five Colors. On the other hand, Kard-Zelm was deeply conflicted. His loyalty to the Empire was absolute, and he felt torn and anxious because of the prince's decision. His face clearly showed signs of hesitation and inner turmoil as he struggled to understand his lord's motives. Then suddenly Kars burst into loud tears, crying out in disbelief at the prince's decision, which seemed to him so harsh, especially since he had never expected such a brave and decisive move from him. Kars was overcome with emotion as he knelt before Gil Lucian, affirming his deep belief that the prince and choose the right path. He declared that he would follow the princess' will path and fate no matter the circumstances, vowing to fight anyone who stood in his way. At that moment, a system window appeared before Gil Lucian, officially announcing that Kars and Turvan had joined his party, causing Kars to feel a bit embarrassed and awkward. Elsewhere, Marquis Elon Lewitz. Good. Overcome by a deep sense of frustration, he was pondering the current situation when his lieutenant approached, asking about the progress of the search operations. The lieutenant informed him that there were traces of the group's escape, but they had been very skilled in covering their tracks. Elon became furious, calling Prince Gil Lucian utterly useless. He then remembered the story of his youngest son Kars, the tragic child who was nearly enslaved under imperial law if not for Elon's tremendous efforts to secure a better life for him by placing him in the care of the Sicilian family. But instead of becoming a distinguished knight, Carter's ended up as the personal guard of the failure known as the Third Prince, Gil Lucian, following him into drinking parties. Even kidnappings which severely damaged his reputation. Elon's anger toward Gil Lucian intensified, blaming the prince for dragging his son Kars into endless trouble when Kars was one of the most gifted talents in the empire. He thought that if this situation ended with the prince's death, it would be best to bring Kars back into the ranks of the knights. He anxiously asked his aide. Other Kars in Turvan who were also searching for the prince might find him first. The aide replied that the chance of that happening was slim due to the type of magic Turvan used, which wasn't suited for tracking. Elon smiled wickedly and said the heavens were favoring them this time, then gave his lieutenant a firm order not to be lenient with their primary mission to eliminate the kidnappers, to block all escape routes, no matter the cost. After issuing the orders, his special forces began moving to carry them out. Through these orders, it became clear that Elon had completely dismissed the Third Prince's existence and had chosen to focus solely on annihilating the group, regardless of how much blood might be spilled, including that of the prince himself. Meanwhile, Illusion was deep in thought when Cards called his name, jolting him from his thoughts. Card's prince asked why he seemed so distracted and why he was carrying a sword. The prince replied that he was using it for something. Cards noticed a clear change in the prince's expression. It was sharper and more serious, and Gil Lucian replied sarcastically that he'd been forced to run a lot lately with shady men, and it was a miracle he hadn't died yet. Unexpectedly, Kars responded calmly, saying, "But in the end, you didn't die," which made Gil Lucy wonder why Kars was acting so strangely. Kars then expressed how deeply worried he had been for the prince during the pursuit, and how afraid he was that something terrible might happen to him at that moment. Gil Lucian remembered that, in the original story, his relationship with Kars had been like that of brothers. Even though he wasn't the real Gil Lucian, he felt genuinely happy to see Kars before him as a real person. Gil Lucian thought intently about Kars, remembering that he was his favorite frontline attacker in the game known as the Knight of Dawn, the exceptional warrior who shined most brilliantly at the end of the game. If properly nurtured, and even though this meeting was real, it felt to him like running into an old-school friend after years apart. Turvan then joined them, having just woken up. She greeted them cheerfully, yawning and asking Gil Lucian if he had slept well. Gil Lucian admitted to himself that although Turvan was harder to use as a party member in the game compared to Kars, he was still very happy. This year Kars asked Turvan to join their conversation, which made her extremely shy because of his handsomeness, and she began to act noticeably nervous. During the conversation, Kars told Gil Lucian that it felt as if they had returned to the old days, the days of the Palace of Boys, the academy for the sons of nobles in the Empire. Kars began speaking to Gil Lucian about the past. When the prince had been a radiant figure, loved by everyone in the palace, even the emperor himself had held great affection for him. Gil Lucian was deeply surprised by this new piece of information, as neither the game nor the original story ever mentioned that the third prince had once been a normal child. Kars continued, pointing out that the prince's fate would have been completely different if the Empire hadn't idolized magic and made it a fundamental requirement for all Gil. Lucian immediately understood the reason behind the prince's decline and loss of status. He had absolutely no magical talent despite being a prince and a magic-based empire. He recalled how everyone had high expectations of him due to his noble birth, and how he had suffered greatly from the gradual loss of affection. As people discovered his magical weakness, though he sympathized with these painful memories, he felt they didn't truly belong to him, but to the character he had replaced. So he gently asked Cards not to dwell too much on the past. He added that the past no longer mattered, and that no one remembered the third prince as he once was, except Carters alone. Gil Lucian then suggested they focus only on the present, which Carters immediately agreed to. Gil Lucian felt relieved, expressing how glad he was that people no longer recognized him easily. Gil Lucian regained full confidence in himself, deciding that he would become the most experienced person in navigating this world, and he would not accept remaining a useless character. He affirmed to himself that even though he didn't have magical talent, and even though he had drawn a low-tier slave, gladiator card instead of the legendary mage card, he wasn't giving up. Believing there were still many chances ahead, Gil Lucian turned toward Kars and told him firmly that he would fight to survive and return, and that when he did return to the Empire, no one would dare ignore him again, whether as a friend, a brother, or a master. Kars was slightly surprised by these confident words, but Gil Lucian cheerfully told him to stand tall with pride, which embarrassed Cards and made him try to hide his flustered reaction. Gil Lucian then began discussing his plans with Kars and Turvan, once again explaining why he wouldn't return to the Imperial Palace because of the large number of traitors within it. Kars acknowledged this, and Gil Lucian pointed specifically to Marquis Ilan Lute, the great commander who guarded the northern capital and posed a serious threat to them. Kars was deeply shocked and refused to believe that Marquis Louise could be involved in treachery. Gil Lucci and clarified that he didn't believe Marquis Louis was a traitor, but that he stood in their way for now and would destroy their group and forcibly return him to the Imperial Palace. Kars asked with great concern if the prince planned to persuade the Marquis as he had done with him and Turvan Gil. Lucian replied with doubt, wondering if his words could ever truly reach the Marquis's heart. Kars admitted sadly that he didn't believe the persuasion plan would succeed, as the revolutionary priest would be quickly wiped out and the prince would be dragged back to the palace with no chance of escape. Gil Lutin reassured Kars that he wasn't discouraged and confirmed that he already had a backup plan. Both Kars and Turvan became extremely curious to hear his new plan and eagerly asked him to share it. Gil Lucian gripped the sword in front of him and calmly, confidently declared that the plan was very simple. He would challenge Marquis Louis and defeat him in order to pass safely to the city of Oryx. Both Kars and Turvan were stunned by this bold plan, and expressions of confusion and astonishment appeared on their faces. Kars asked the prince with great concern if he was sick or had lost his mind, pointing out that Marquis Louise was still a superhuman in terms of strength. Gil Lucci and replied irritably, wondering aloud why they were so impatient, sarcastically assuring them that he wasn't sick. Kars exploded in anger, demanding to know how they were supposed to deal with the military commander as powerful as Marquis Lute, completely rejecting Gil Lucian's idea. Turvan smirked as she looked toward Gil Lucian, saying sarcastically that she wished he had shown this much interest in magic earlier. At that moment, Gil Lucian felt that both Kars and Turvan were completely ignoring him because they clearly didn't believe his plan had any chance of success, but he reminded himself that this world they lived in, called the world forsaken by the lady, had its own unique rules that didn't rely solely on level grinding or drawing fate cards. A 6-star character could defeat a 9-star one if the circumstances were properly exploited through traps, psychological tactics, and strategic planning. Turvan asked Gil Lucian directly to explain his plan, wondering how he intended to deal with the Marquis. Gil Lucian answered with full confidence that he would challenge the Marquis to an official noble duel and simply beat him. Kars immediately snapped back in anger, disbelief, saying that was completely impossible. Gil Lucian explained the concept of a noble duel, a traditional one-on-one fight governed by imperial laws and noble customs, held under agreed-upon terms and requiring a neutral witness. He then said they needed to create conditions that made the duel winnable, and he nominated Kars as the witness. Kars strongly objected, stating that the Marquis would never accept such odd conditions, especially ones that put the prince in danger. Gil Lucian confidently laid out the 3 conditions he would propose to the Marquis. First, swords only. Second, the one who drops their sword loses immediately. Third, no armor allowed. Kars became even more furious upon hearing the terms, and told the prince they were completely unfavorable. He explained that the first condition, swords only, might seem helpful to the prince who had no mana, but it actually benefited the Marquis, who was already the Empire's greatest swordsman. The second condition, he said, put the weaker party at a huge disadvantage, since naturally the weaker fighter would drop their sword first. As for the third, no armor, it was completely unacceptable, as it would endanger the prince's safety. Kars firmly refused to be a witness to such reckless conditions, saying he couldn't endorse something that might lead to the prince's death. Gil Lucian tried to calm him, assuring him that his life wasn't in any danger at all. Kars asked with great concern how he could be so sure, and Gil Lucian applied in a simple tone. A professional duelist like the Marquis with decades of experience wouldn't take a duel with a beginner prince seriously, and would handle it cautiously to avoid causing serious harm. Kars immediately agreed with Gil Lucian's logic, saying it made a lot of sense, and that the no armor rule would indeed make the Marquis more careful. Gil Lucian continued calmly and confidently, saying that he definitely wouldn't be killed by the Marquis, even if the Marquis hated him and wanted him dead. He thought privately that Kars' presence as a witness would make the Marquis hold back even more, since he wouldn't want to injure a prince in front of his beloved son. Kars then asked, confused, why the Marquis hated Gil Lucian so much. Gil Lucian hesitated for a moment, realizing he had to avoid revealing the full truth that the Marquis wanted to kill him to secure his son's future, so he simply said there was a misunderstanding between them. Kars remained bewildered, but didn't press further. When Gil Lucian apologized for not going into detail, Turvan suddenly remembered that she hadn't seen the priest from the church all day, and she wondered aloud why they were missing. Gil Lucian responded with a mysterious smile and said he had made a small personal request of them. Nearby, a group of priests were arguing among themselves after having captured some strange creatures like goblins. They were bickering over who had caught the most impressive prize, while the high priest looked on with deep disapproval at their childish behavior. Some of the priests objected, saying that, but their fellow priest was doing counted as cheating, demanding that one of the captured creatures be released. The high priest replied in annoyance, asking why he should release something he caught himself. Another priest intervened, asking what they intended to do about the humans who had been captured by those creatures. Elsewhere nearby, a group of people were locked in a dark room, looking terrified. Then suddenly, someone entered, illuminated by a blinding light. The high priest explained that he had returned the people who had been rescued to their village, saying it was by the will of Lord Alaman, and asked the others to thank him. After that, he noted that their preparation seemed to be fully complete, and instructed the priest to summon the third prince, Gil Lucian. The priest began arguing, enthusiastically among themselves about who would go to summon Lucian, each claiming to be the closest to the prince and most deserving of the task, prompting the high priest to angrily interrupt them. He warned them seriously, saying that while Gil Lucian might be a candidate for the role of messenger, until confirmation came from the high priest himself, he remained a prince of an enemy nation, and cautioned them not to become emotionally attached. Before his position was officially recognized, the high priest turned to one of his followers and ordered him to fetch the prince. The young man agreed immediately and set off to carry out the task. Internally, the young man decided he needed to learn more about the plan Gil Lucian was preparing, while the other priests questioned why this particular youth had been brought along. The high priest simply said they needed to cooperate with him for now. Meanwhile, Gil Lucian stood holding his sword and suggested to his companions that they start moving while they talked. He explained that the situation in the nearby goblin villages should be resolved by now. Turvin asked what he meant by resolved, and Gil Lucian clarified that he had asked the priest to handle the nearby goblin villages, calling it part of a leveling up process as it's known in game terms. Kars and Turvin exchanged confused glances, clearly not understanding what Gil Lucian meant. Gil Lucian continued with a confident smile, saying that it was necessary for him personally to complete the final part of the mission in the nearby damp goblin village. A dangerous area inhabited by veteran goblins and not recommended for beginners. Gil Lucian and his companions began heading toward it. While walking, Gil Lucian said he knew Marquis Ilan Louis's weakness very well. Kars interjected that he also knew the Marquis's weakness, saying it was that his mana didn't fully synchronize with his sword techniques. Turvin agreed and added that she had also heard the Marquis had poor mana output efficiency, but Gil Lucian explained that these weaknesses were minor compared to other swordmasters, and revealed that the Marquis's real problem was a serious condition in his right shoulder, near paralysis. Gil Lucian remembered that Marquis Elan Lut had appeared in the game with a paralyzed shoulder for specific reasons. The critical weakness very few knew about. Turvin was surprised by this information and admitted it was the first time she had ever heard it. Kars cautiously asked where Gil Lucian had gotten such an important detail, and Gil Lucian hesitated before resorting to a simple trick, saying he had overheard the Emperor himself discussing it with the commander of the Royal Knights. Kars suggested that, if this information were true, the Marquis would be unable to use the Vanguard Blade style, a combat technique that requires the use of both hands. Gil Lucian confirmed Kars's deduction, explaining that Vanguard Blade was an S-rank secret technique that relied on great strength and dual-handed sword use, a famous skill of the Loud family. Known as Twin Severance, which increased damage by 20% when used, the Vanguard Blade technique was what had elevated Marquis Elan to the rank of a 9-star swordsman, making him legendary and extremely powerful. Turvin was intrigued by the idea that the Marquis might be unable to use his signature technique, saying it could open a path to defeat him. The Kars cautioned them that even without both hands, the great swordsman remained dangerous. His solo skill level could easily match that of a 7-star warrior, a level Gil Lucian could never reach in his current condition. Gil Lucian felt slightly discouraged by Carson's unwavering loyalty and wondered to himself whether Kars was truly on his side, or just blindly. Oil then. Gil Lucian quietly admitted that Kars was right, but emphasized that he also knew exactly what kind of one-handed combat style the Marquis would use, and that he was fully prepared for that encounter. Turvin and Kars's expression shifted to surprise as they realized that Gil Lucian had precise knowledge of the one-handed combat style the Marquis would use. Illusion began explaining with greater confidence, saying that the world of swordsmanship relies heavily on the synergy between techniques and fighting styles. He added that even mid-level techniques could become incredibly effective if used under the right circumstances. Therefore, he truly believed there was a real chance of making the Marquis drop his sword, even if it wasn't a big one at that moment. A mysterious figure emerged silently from between the trees. Watching them, Gil Lucy and immediately stopped speaking, sensing the person's presence, and wondered with surprise how long he had been there. The figure slowly approached and bluntly asked Gil Lucian whether he truly had the strength to face the Marquis' sword, or if he was far too weak for it. He moved his face closer to Gil Lucian, and sharply repeated his question. Was he wrong? Gil Lucian responded calmly, openly admitting that he currently couldn't block the Marquise attacks, but added that he planned to obtain a power zone from here, something that would greatly enhance his physical strength for a short period. The mysterious man immediately understood what Gil Lucian meant, realizing that he was planning to face the mighty king of the Rockman Mountains, a terrifying beast, and that this would be impossible to accomplish alone. However, Gil Lucian assured him that he fully understood the risk, and believed help would arrive in time if he did what needed to be done. Meanwhile, Gil Lucian approached a goblin who began screaming at him, saying he hated humans and ordering him not to come any closer. Although Gil Lucian understood that this strange creature before him was real and not just a game character, he was determined to survive in this world. Knowing full well he had no other choice, Gil Lucian attacked the goblin directly and killed it with a single blow. Instantly leveling up and feeling a surge of power rush through his body, he received one extra skill point. He opened the skill window and realized that with the points he had saved earlier, he now had 3 skill points available. Gil Lucian used those points to learn Vagabond martial arts, which granted him an extra boost in strength and endurance. He realized that to learn the skill necessary to face Marquis Elon, he'd need to reach at least level 9. But he was currently only level 1, and the road ahead felt incredibly long. He began slaying more goblins one after another, and his power quickly rose through the levels, as he advanced at a rapid pace with his new skill points. Gil Lucian learned the extreme training skill, which improved his reaction in critical moments and slightly boosted his intelligence. Illusion returned to the group, and Kars and Turvin noticed a significant change in his presence. Turvin playfully asked if he had snuck off to eat something good without telling them. Gil Lucian felt the immense changes in his body thanks to the new skills and smiled, saying he had eaten something quite good prepared for him by the priests. Turvin immediately became furious, yelling and getting emotional, accusing him of being greedy and impolite for not leaving any for her. Internally, Gil Lucian was amused by Turvin's overreaction, especially since she was still just a 19-year-old girl. The high priest calmly approached Gil Lucian and asked him what the next step would be. As everyone turned to listen to his decision, Gil Lucian told the high priest that there were still some goblins nearby and asked him to have the priest drive a few toward him so that he could deal with them without exhausting himself. Gil Lucian began mentally and physically preparing for the next fight, fully aware that he had to engage directly this time to gain more practical experience and get a better feel for the sword. Kars shouted a warning that the goblins were approaching quickly, but Gil Lucian was surprised to see far more goblins charging at him than he had expected. Realizing he had miscalculated, Turvin intervened with a powerful burst of magical fire, telling him she would take care of 2 of them to ease the pressure. Kars urged Gil Lucian to stay focused, and at that very moment, one of the goblins lunged at him, screaming that he would kill him because he was just a weak human. Illusion moved swiftly, blocking the goblin's attack with his sword, clearly prepared and confident, fully determined to survive this battle no matter how dangerous it became. Gil Lucian began to feel surprised by the strength of the goblin's attack. It looked small in size, yet its strike was unexpectedly powerful. Still, he moved swiftly and tried to dodge the goblin's blow with his sword, focusing hard to maintain his concentration during the fight. Gil Lucian noticed that his movements had become smoother and stronger, likely thanks to the slave gladiator card he had acquired earlier, and he found sword combat oddly familiar to him. During the battle, Gil Lucian observed timing indicators appearing on the goblin, highlighting the perfect moment to strike, just like in the game he used to play. This gave him extra confidence that he could end the encounter easily. Indeed, he took down the goblin quickly, finding it much easier than he had originally expected. Gil Lucian continued fighting and activating his skills. He triggered the Taste of Pain ability, which greatly boosted his physical and mental recovery for 30 seconds, allowing him to continue the battle fiercely without pause. But after a while, Kars intervened and asked the prince to stop, saying that everyone, including the priests, was now completely exhausted. Illusion finally agreed to end the training for the day, and suggested they rest and have something to drink in celebration of their progress. The priests rejoiced loudly, expressing deep gratitude to Lord Elam for granting them this opportunity. In the evening, everyone gathered around the campfire, where one of the priests told stories of his past encounters with giant orcs filling the air. With laughter and teasing at the same time, a unit of Imperial Special Forces knights was watching the scene from afar, cautiously and anxiously observing, clearly tense about what they were seeing. The Special Forces captain watched Gil Lucian and his group from behind a tree, deeply puzzled by what he was witnessing, especially since Gil Lucian, known as a lazy and worthless, Rums now looked completely different, laughing and speaking confidently with Kars. One of his soldiers nervously asked whether they should attack the group immediately, but the captain told him to wait a bit until he decided what to do. Internally, the captain was analyzing the current situation in disbelief. The group hadn't even tried to hide their movements in recent days. They were lighting open fires and drinking alcohol without any concern, which made him suspicious that this could all be a trap set to lure them in. He continued assessing the situation, baffled that the mission had originally been to eliminate the kidnappers. Yet Gil Lucian didn't look like a hostage at all. He was speaking and laughing like he was with friends, and accompanying him were the famous knight Carcillion and the renowned sorceress Terving Sui.